Well, Ms. James, please call the roll of the city council.
The Honorable Mayor Pro Tem Linda J. Davis.
Present.
The Honorable Pat Pallin.
Present.
The Honorable Alex Heath.
Present.
The Honorable Ulysses J. Smallwood.
Present.
The Honorable Hattie Portis Jones.
Absent.
The Honorable James Whitmore.
Present.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you so much. At this time, we'll go straight to the Assistant City Administrator.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
Tonight, we want to provide you with an update on our Code Enforcement Department with the onboarding of our Code Enforcement Manager. They just kind of want to share with you some updates as far as operations, some of the common violations we see from a residential and a commercial standpoint, and kind of where code enforcement is in addressing issues throughout the city. And so with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Denise Brookins, our Planning and Zoning Director, and Mr. Londell Fleming, our Code Enforcement Manager.
Good afternoon.
Good evening.
I am thrilled to be joining you to talk about one of the most important things I think we can do in the city and just make sure any and all things related to code enforcement is in tip-top shape and being very productive. This evening, we're just kind of give over an overview of some of the structural changes we've made, process improvements, and some upcoming things. Over the last 90 days, since code enforcement transitioned to planning and zoning, we've been really focusing on, hi, Mr. Phillips.
You just called him out like that?
Focusing on making sure that we understood kind of the full scope of, so I know I'm not the only one that wants to say hello.
Well, hello, Mr. Phillips.
Hello, Mr.
Hello, Mr.
Phillips.
Phillips.
How are you?
Good to see you. That's okay.
No problems.
You're on time.
You excuse.
Sorry, Mayor. Sorry, Ms. Brookins, didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem at all. So code enforcement transitioned to planning and zoning in January, and since that time, we've been auditing all of our scope of work. We've been looking at all of our forms, making sure that with the technology, we were fully utilizing all aspects of it so that we could track progress, begin to do things like develop districts, but making sure that the areas where every area was covered sufficiently. Also increasing technology integration, making sure folks had laptops, MiFi, everything that they needed in the field to be able to operate effectively. So under planning and zoning, we have long and short range planning, building and permitting, and of course, code enforcement. And that involves field investigation, the vacant property program, community outreach, looking at blight, and also property maintenance. In terms of just a high-level overview of process improvement with auditing services, you begin to kind of look at where the gaps are in terms of just developing SOPs that are utilizing the best practices that we know of. We hired a code enforcement manager who had a lot of experience from DeKalb County to the city of Atlanta, is a real estate appraisal. So he has a great deal of knowledge on the ground and real life experience so that all of our code enforcement officers could benefit from that. With all of that said, I'm going to turn it over to our code enforcement manager to kind of give you an overview of some of the common violations and just to give you a sort of code enforcement 101.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So what you see before you right now is what we consider to be the top 7 code violations that the city of Fairburn has to deal with on a daily basis. As you read sort of from left to right, you have the commercial vehicles illegally parked. What we're primarily talking about right there is the tractor trailers, bulldozers, tow trucks, things of that nature that are illegally parked within residential areas. So we're really trying to crack down on that, make sure people understand that that is not allowed. It's not the size of it and the weight of it is not fit to actually structurally hold up on any sort of residential lot. So we're really pushing that issue as well. Sanitation, trash, recycle bins. There appears to be a disconnect of some sort within the city of Fairburn from the way things was, the way they were done one time before, to some of the new actual services that GFL presents to the public. With that being said, we are trying to make sure that the public does understand that there are some differences, and when those differences do come about, there are calls that need to be placed to the GFL company themselves in order to get trash, bulk pickup, recycle bins taken care of in a timely manner, so on and so forth. And I'll come back through if anyone have any questions in regards to any of those particular violations, so we can kind of speak on those a little bit. Working without required permit, we are in the process of putting stock work orders on a lot of projects that are taking place around the city of Fairmont that do not have the required permits on hand. And that can be anything from the actual tree permit themselves, the roofs that are being replaced, or if there's any sort of interior renovations taking place that does require a permit, but for some reason they have not stopped by city planning department to obtain that permit for that type of service that they want to complete. The stop work itself is accompanied by an actual correction notice that pretty much gives them a time frame on when they need to come into the office and obtain that actual permit for the work that they're doing on site before we actually write citations for those violations. Junk, trash, and debris is pretty straightforward. The actual outward display or the lack of storage of junk, trash, and debris on the residential lots or commercial lots for that matter definitely is one of the areas that we're taking care of as well. We do know when you concentrate on some of those simple issues or simple violations on a wider spread across the city, it has a major impact. So if we can get one particular person or one particular business to kind of follow suit, and as we productively talk to each resident or each actual business owner on that particular tract of space, then it begins to have that overall feel and overall cleanup perception to it. High weeds and grass. Well, we're in the season of high weeds and grass right now, and that will always be a challenge no matter what city you're in or what jurisdiction you may actually be providing services in. So we'll just continue to deal with that as it come about. There are some areas that are a little worse off than others. Those are being brought to my attention, and as they are on a consistent basis, we're making sure that we try to deal with that in a timely manner as well. Illegally parking vehicles on the grass in a residential area. That is simple. Someone is within certain areas, the density is kind of tight, and you have one car parking or one car driveway that's available to that resident. But now you may be aware of the fact that there are several generations that are living within one household. And so the adequate parking that you would have had 20, 30, or 40 years ago is just not there right now. With that being said, the son who gets up and go to school for college late in the day doesn't want to move his or her car when mom has to go to work in the morning. So the easier thing to do is just to park on the grass and let mom scoot on out, and then we kind of go from there. Unfortunately, they don't take the cars off the grass if that's the point. So we're trying to make sure we kind of push that narrative among the residents. Inoperable vehicles, unregistered, or vehicles that are in disrepair pretty much speaks for itself. Inoperable vehicles or in disrepair, if they're unregistered, they don't have a current tag on them. If the vehicle itself does not move or is wrecked and it needs to be removed from the property and repaired and maybe brought back, we're making sure that the residents understand that that sort of blight is just not acceptable, especially on a wide scale. Is there any one of those that we would like to touch on at the moment? Well, yes, sir.
Start, Mr. Smallwood.
I have a couple of them, and just trying to understand a few things, because you guys have a lot of areas.
That's correct.
So I will just talk first about, because I know me and Chief, we've been on some things, and talk to me then about parking on the street in subdivisions. What's acceptable, what's not, and like you just said, though, the challenge is, you have 20, 30 years ago, it was like, okay, well, you had more space, and so you know that someone may be on the street but need to pull it in because they need to let somebody out and all that. But talk to me about that, because I see that's a huge issue. I have even people not, people dealing with that, and then the hierarchy on who trumps who and how things are being recorded, because I know you guys are out there, but subdivisions are out there doing their own thing as well. So just trying to get a clear understanding of the process, first with the illegally parked vehicles on the street in subdivisions.
Yeah, so the ordinance does have verbiage in it that speaks to that. For the most part, when you talk about inside of a subdivision on the public right-of-way itself, sometimes you run into incidents where people are clogging up the cul-de-sac, or they may actually be parking on a street that deads in into another street, so if someone makes a turn left or right, they can be hit by oncoming vehicles. What we like to do is if we can pinpoint who actually owns the car, we'd like to have a conversation with them first in regards to just moving the vehicle from that actual spot itself. When it comes down to being cited for those actual violations, the police department does have the authority to write citations for those type of situations. And we also have the actual authority to address and write citations if we had to in regards to those cases. But because it has to do with the actual life and safety of where the vehicle is located at, we do defer that to the police department if for some reason we're unable to get in contact with the owner of the vehicle who may be visiting or even staying on that location.
Yes, because I see sometimes where cul-de-sacs are blocked up, fire departments couldn't even get in if there was an issue, so those are the type of things. So then talk to me then about, is there signage that's available for that? I mean, how does that work?
Good question.
Because, I mean, a lot of people are just unaware of what's permissible
Right.
in, on these streets.
So my observation is that the signage is not there the way that it should be to let folks know that you should not park their vehicles inside the subdivision or block particular streets. That signage would give the actual authority, if they need to, from a code enforcement perspective, to actually have those vehicles removed by tone and so on and so forth. Without that signage there, our first approach is to have that conversation and make people aware of the ordinance, so they may just voluntarily move or comply. And if not, then we'll ask for PD to get involved to have those vehicles move for people, receive citations for that.
Before, if you don't mind, Mr. Smallwood, Chief, the police chief, could you kind of, do you have anything you want to add in this case to help answer the question he brought?
So, ordinance 56-22, I was just pulling it up, listening to the conversation.
Exactly.
There shall be no parking on residential street directly across from another vehicle already parked or within 50 feet of that vehicle. There shall be no on-street parking within any residential cul-de-sac. There shall be no on-street parking within 50 feet of a residential street intersection. There shall be no parking on a residential street facing in the direction of oncoming traffic. And finally, there shall be no parking on a residential street opposite a driveway.
I'm just want to make sure that, is there any, okay, gotcha. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, in reference, Councilman Smallwood, you asked about signage. So for those 5 prohibitions, which are the ones that are in our ordinance, we typically don't have signage in subdivisions for that. The enforcement method is typically some type of warning or notice initially, because a lot of people may not be aware.
Yeah.
If you don't comply, then the next step is you receive a citation.
Right.
And that's essentially how we manage that, is we try to educate folks by giving them a warning or a notice first, because we do recognize that a lot of citizens may not be aware I shouldn't park there.
Right.
But once you're made aware, then you have the opportunity to either comply or we move down a path of issuing a citation.
And can I ask a question and follow up to what you just said? If you have the same vehicle that has been in violation, let's just say in a 90-day period, I now have realized I got the same vehicle 3 times. My real question is, at what point does the numerous violations equate to a citation? I don't know if that's your policy. I was just.
There's a little bit of officer discretion. We don't have a firm policy. Depending on, like Mr. Phillips said, how the conversation goes, because we do try to give a friendly warning first, knock on the door and say, hey, according to this ordinance, you can't have the car here. You can't have the car blocking the driveway or in a cul-de-sac. And again, if there's some kind of extenuating circumstance, a birthday party, something like that, we're going to be pretty, understanding of that. If it's a repeated violation 2 or 3 times, at that point, you're probably going to get a parking ticket.
And, Mr. Mayor, if I could, what I would add to that is those 5 things that the chief just read out are the only parking restrictions in our ordinance. That meaning that it is possible to park on the street and not be illegally parked. Some people believe that all parking on the street is prohibited, and that's not true under our ordinance. And the last point I would make is several subdivisions have their own policies that they enforce through their homeowners association, right? Through their covenants. And how they manage that is a civil issue. The HOA has to enforce that in whatever way. But I think there's confusion sometimes because residents believe that police officers and code enforcement officers are also enforcing their covenants. And that is not the case. And so we've gotten that call several times in the past few months where residents will call and go, well, it's in our covenants that you can't do this, that, or a different issue. And we try to explain that to residents to say we're only allowed to enforce city ordinances. and covenants are civil. That means you have to work through your HOA if one of your homeowners isn't abiding by the HOA covenants.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, I was gonna actually yield to you in a minute, but I wanted to make sure before,
Yeah, I got one more.
yeah.
And but also a piggyback on that, I think then it's just an education thing then because it is kind of muddied. And without signage, then the onus is on the resident to call, and then they have to then be said that, well, that doesn't apply. And I know your staff is very, very well, but just putting it out there, but does everybody know exactly when they come out there how to interpret that ordinance? You know, so because I know it's a lot, of cars being parked on the street right now.
I think a great deal of effort from our department is also being utilizing social media and every available means of communicating with folks. Because if you just move to town or if you've been here for a very long time, there's still very much an educational
Right.
piece that has to happen.
Yes.
We don't want to be the department that is constantly going out and giving citations without also communicating with
Yes.
people. So once you kind of understand what the expectations are and what compliance means, that's critical to it. But along with doing a lot of community outreach, kind of explaining why we have those regulations in place, you can never call us and we don't give you an answer about
Right,
kind
right.
of what the rules and regulations
Yes.
are. And in a prior life, working with a code enforcement department and with the police department, we actually had policies as it relates to signage, so that we can make sure across the board that we were kind of treating everybody fairly and there was sort of a systematic approach, because you don't want to get in the business of having
Yes.
a subdivision full of signs. So
Right.
we kind of have to figure out what that policy is and making sure we're following it for every
I
case.
agree. Yes.
If you don't mind, before you go, I wanted to yield to Mr. Whitmore to kind of follow up on a question he asked, but was just stated. Having been the interim president of Durham Lakes in a HOA that actually has a real strong policy about parking, could you just kind of enlighten us as it relates to what was just brought up?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is, well, first of all, let me make a statement, okay? We do not have any communities within the city of Fairbairn where they're private streets, right? So we don't have a gated community, so all those streets are city streets. So therefore, my question to you, does the covenants of a subdivision trump city ordinance?
Mr. Attorney, I may need to.
And I knew that answer. But I just wanted to just put it out there for those that are watching on social media or whatever. So there is, as you forestated, a lot of illegal parking going on through subdivisions throughout the city, actually, to be blunt. And, there's a lot of enforcement to be dealt with in that respect. If you can put that last slide up, please. And you talked about commercial vehicles illegally parked. And you talked about within subdivisions or residential areas. And we know that those streets have not been built to sustain heavy weight, like the tractor trailers. So I understand what you're doing in that respect. But still on the other side, and we have an influx of trucks throughout the city because of Amazon, because of the increase in people receiving their goods within a 24-hour period. But we do see a lot of trucks that are parked illegally also around the commercial industry. And I just deal with one in particular that would be over there by the truck stop. I don't want to pay my $5, so I'm just going to park on the side of the road, which now causes another problem, because if a vehicle's coming down, they sway out, and now they're encroaching the other car that's coming the opposite way. So now we have a safety issue there. So it's not just residential, it's also in commercial as well. I wanted to make that fine distinction because for years we have been talking about illegal truck parking, and now more than ever it's starting to increase. So I just ask you to throw that on your radar as well. And I think
do
that's it for right now, Mayor.
Okay. Ms. Davis?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I wanted to go back to the commercial vehicles illegally parked, but I want to talk about,
Speak it to the mic.
oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to talk about whose purview is this? Is it the police or is it zoning when the tractor trailers cut through subdivisions, and in particular Meadow Glen has had tremendous, issues with that, and our police officers have been there, they've stayed there, but they can't sit there all day to, guide that or whatever. But what part does zoning have in that outside of what the police is already trying to do to deal with that situation?
Well, as it relates to the actual vehicles being stored or parked illegally on any particular lot, in terms of the actual zoning ordinance, that is the focus of the Code Enforcement Division. If you are there beyond normal delivery hours, if there's any extended period of time that is abnormal that we're not aware of, we try to address those issues for any given lot for the matter. Residential stands out a little more simply because when it's in a residential area, it's like a big eyesore. You can really see it, and we can kind of easily address those versus some of the commercial vehicles that may be stored around similar storage lots or something of that nature. Now, the actual driving through, like a truck going down the wrong street or the wrong
Cutting through.
Yeah, now that would be my understanding, is that would be a police matter in terms of making sure, or DOT or something of that nature that deals with those individual streets
Right.
or illegal access to roads and
Right.
things like that.
I just wanted to know if zoning had any area in that or participation in that. And so I know, Chief, what you all have been doing and trying to curtail that and stuff. Is there any additional things that the police?
Really, it's just a matter of catching them in the act. If they're moving, it's going to be a PD issue. If they're stationary, either PD or code can address.
Okay, all right. My other question is on number 2, the sanitation, trash, and recycle bins. I think I heard you say that they are to call GFL. Okay, so who gets the first call? If there's if a citizen is having an issue with trash being picked up or whatever, sometimes they overlook, the GFL may overlook it or what. Who's the first call that should be made? Is it to the city so they can keep a record of that and they get in touch with GFL? Or does the citizen call GFL?
So the way I understand it right now and the way we've been conducting it in the last couple of months, that if we're talking about regular trash collection, right, regular refuge, then that particular homeowner will call GFL if they have a problem with regular pickup. If we're talking about actual yard debris that is bundled and ready for pickup, less than 4 feet across, then those particular bundles can be picked up according to GFL doing regular trash collection. Okay, when they come a little bigger, if we're talking about big bulks of yard debris, right, they may be 3 or 4 feet high, 6 or 7 feet wide, and what has not been taking place is that the residents have not been calling GFL to schedule the pickup on a consistent basis, thinking that, I guess in the past, that the services, they would just pick it up regardless of size, bulk, and so on. But now, if it is of any certain size beyond 4 feet wide, according to the operations manager, because I didn't give them a call so I can get some details on it, they would prefer that that call actually be made to them so they can schedule that pickup and have some sort of understanding of what type of trash is out there and what the weight and the scale and the scope of it may be. Now, that would be for yard debris and for what they consider to be bulk pickup, which is furniture, toys, appliances, things of that nature. That needs to be scheduled. And that scheduling is for the first and third Tuesdays for that type of large debris. What code enforcement has been doing is once we are aware that that actual pickup has been scheduled, then we will allow GFL to provide those services. And if not, then we're providing a follow-up to see actually what the situation may be and why it was not picked up on the scheduled first or third Tuesday of the actual month.
Okay, the number of calls, just, I want to establish a protocol so the citizens will know. So if it's not picked up the first time, they call GFL.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I may.
Yes, thank
There
you.
are some specific contractual methods to how trash is picked up under the current GFL contract.
Okay,
Regular household garbage, you don't have to call anyone. You put it out on the collection day, which I believe is Tuesday. It doesn't require that anyone call
Yeah.
at all. Yard debris is picked up every other week. That also does not require a special call. Bulk trash, which is, and Mr. Fleming was exactly right. There's a qualification on yard debris. They will only pick up a pile that is no more than 4 feet wide by 4 feet high. So in other words, if you have a large amount of, let's say you had a tree cut down, you can't put that at the curb and GFL is going to come pick that up. It has to be basic yard debris, 4 by 4 by 4. Anything larger than that is outside of their contractual obligation.
Right.
Bulk trash, furniture, appliances, things of that nature, you must call and schedule in
Right.
advance a pickup. We have tried and we will continue our efforts. We've put it out on social media several times over the last nearly year. We post on social media those guidelines,
Right.
who to call, when to call, what you need to call for, primarily bulk trash. If there is a missed pickup, and GFL has improved over the last 9 months. They aren't missing nearly as many pickups as they were a year ago.
Right.
So that process has improved. Those calls often end up going to our customer service division in utilities, and they will contact GFL. And they've been quickly responding when they do miss them, though again, those have been less frequent in the last 9 months or so. So the only time a resident has to pick up the phone and call GFL to have something picked up is when it's bulk trash. If it's regular household garbage, or if it is yard debris, that is part of their regularly scheduled pickups.
right. I guess what I'm trying to, I understand all that. What I'm trying to get to here is really just the trash, because I know there are guidelines that's already established for bulk and the process. Say if trash for the first time, and they have improved, I just want to establish some protocols first in reference to just the trash. If their trash was missed, does a citizen call GFL for that prior to, and not the city? Okay,
So-
that's the protocol that I'm focusing on right now,
That is also in the contract,
right?
that they have a call center at GFL,
Okay,
and that when a citizen has a service issue, the contract says they should contact GFL, and they're supposed to log all of those calls and how they responded to them. What has been happening by default is that many citizens who live in Fairburn call the city.
yeah.
When they call the city, we're going to respond and
Right.
contact GFL on their behalf.
Right.
If you're asking how should it work,
That's what I want, so the
then
citizens
contract
can hear
says
this, yeah,
that they have a call center in GFL
right,
to respond to citizens who are having service issues.
Right.
So the answer to your question is they should call GFL
GFL.
first. If they're not getting the service through GFL, no one's answering at GFL, they don't get an adequate response. The city of Fairburn's here to make sure that our citizens get the services that they're paying for. And so we do field those calls, but the answer to your question is they should contact GFL.
that should be the first call. Okay, yeah, that was what I was asking. My next question is, in reference to the patrol of, I'm losing, not zoning, the code for the whole city, is there a process for what areas of the city you go to on a regular basis, or how do you, what system do you have in place to make sure that all parts of the city is being patrolled in reference to code?
Yeah. So what we're currently doing is looking into zones at each officer will actually have an opportunity to zone proactively on a daily and on a weekly basis. Part of that also is looking at where is the majority of the actual complaints coming from. Okay? So you have your intake complaints that you deal with, and then you service those areas based on the intake. This intake may be by email, by phone, or walk-ins when people want to share with us any particular issue that's going on in the community. But then also you take a look at the proactive approach to code enforcement as well. And as you comb the neighborhoods, from one side of the city to the next, you'll begin to see sort of a pattern of where some of the same issues arise over and over and over again. We can use that with our database that we actually currently use with the city and kind of put together a matrix of where are the majority of the issues in the city that we need to address. With that being said, your zone could shift over time to make sure that we have enough coverage in those areas, but also it'll make sure that we are responding in a timely manner, and that's from the actual inspection itself to the intake as well. So within 24 hours or no more than 48 hours, the citizens can look in the system or they can call the office and that issue has been taken care of. So as of right now, we are looking at individual zones for the officers, but we're also trying to gauge where the majority of the complaints coming from within the city so we can be effective in our approach.
Okay, great, thank you. One last thing I want to know. I think I have to say, in reference to the parking issue, and that we recognize that today we have multi-families living in one home. So that's great that you our code understands that situation, because it's not like it used to be many, many years ago. How do you modify the way you deal with that, even recognizing that that's something that,
issue?
yeah, that issue?
I think a piece of it is really kind of understanding demographic shifts and then putting into place policies so that we can look at whether or not our parking regulations are realistic, looking at the dimensional standards for new developments that are coming into the city, and just kind of keeping open communication with our code enforcement officers, because they know when they're on the ground what those challenges are. So that's why we have those weekly, monthly meetings to kind of talk about what's happening. And also putting all that together in our platform, OurWorks, so that we can look at which areas in the city are having the majority of the issues and be able to do that deep analysis to put together some policies and bring that in front of you that are well thought out. Our sort of last 90 days or so was really just making sure that all of our code enforcement officers had the initial training. They all went to the GACE training as well, so we wanted to make sure everybody understood what the expectations are. Learning how to use the software, learning how to properly issue a citation, learning what the notice of violation of. And Mr. Fleming has done a fantastic job of working with each of those officers so that we can make sure everybody's on the same page, so that when we start establishing those districts, our KPIs are realistic.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Mr. Whitmore?
Yes, just a couple more. When you were talking about trucks within the community, let's say after hours, okay, especially in HOA communities. More recently, that did happen, okay, and I received a phone call, and the next day I reached out to both the chief of police and also the city administrator just to advise that HOA president what he should do. First step was go talk to the resident, which didn't go well. Then the next step, PD came out there and he complied. So there's ways of making sure that it works, but just going through those proper steps, which I'm sure you're well aware of. The other thing I would like to bring to your attention is we talked about non-permits throughout the city. A lot of it is done on the weekends, on Saturdays. You have the people come in, hit what they need to do, and get out. How are we addressing that when we know that has taken place? That would be my first question. And then I'll have a follow-up question after that.
Well, just because you come in on a Saturday and conduct illegal work, it doesn't make it legal on Monday. So what we do is when we're able to collect that data, collect that evidence that you have conducted work illegally, stop work order can still be placed on the property. And the process of a notice or a citation can still be given. Just because you're done doesn't mean it was right. So our approach is a holistic approach. If we can collect that data, that information, to put in the system to build our case from start to finish, then the stop work order will be issued, and accordingly citations will be written. With that being said, If there is something that is very egregious that we really need to pay attention to, and they're not working Monday through Friday. They know our hours, and they decide they're just gonna be out here on Saturday, and they're gonna be done, and, well, we can address those issues too. There's some flexible situations in there that if we need to adapt just to make sure that we are capturing who the actual perpetrators are, that's not off the table. But yeah, if you're illegal on Friday, you're illegal on Monday, so it doesn't matter to me.
That's what I was looking for. My follow-up question would be this. I understand that when these contractors come in, they're dealing with the homeowner. Other than the homeowner, when we know contractors that are vetted and have their insurance and everything else, and they know they're supposed to get permits, but they violate our ordinance, how do we deal with them?
Well, any illegal work, the homeowner, if at any particular site, the homeowner, contractor, the property manager, the general contractor, they're all on the hook, okay? It's just a matter of who we have a conversation with first and who's gonna voluntarily take the citation versus who we're gonna have to force to get a citation to. With that being said as well, if I'm staying corrected, and I'll actually need this, if you're caught conducting work illegally, the actual fee is double, right? So we're not letting you get away with it scot-free, if you will. There's a certain degree, there's a price to pay other than stop the work. The fee is double, and then if you remove the stop work order, once it has been placed on the property, that can be additional citations can be written for that as well. There is some legislation that we're looking at to put in the ordinance to make sure that when they do those things, that it sticks, that it has a sort of a bite to it, if you will. But yeah, we can address, all parties involved can be addressed in regards to the wrong that's done at that particular property. And of course, we want the people who are actually involved in the violation, those that committed the act, that's who we would like first. But however, if you are a party to that in one way or another, then we can speak to or address those that are all involved for that violation.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question, if I may. This is my first time seeing you. Tell me about yourself, because you are very knowledgeable, and I think you're going, well, I know you're a great asset already, based on the things that you have reviewed and the things that you articulated. I want to know more about your background.
Well, yeah, about 20 years or so of just regulatory and real estate. That's pretty much my background. I was at one point a one-member LLC real estate appraiser here in the state of Georgia for about 12 years. I sort of moved into the regulatory local government about 8 years ago. So I've worked for DeKalb County for about 2.5 years, City of Atlanta for about 3.5 years, in the community development department, as well as a zoning enforcement supervisor in the buildings department for the City of Atlanta. So I've seen it all, if you will. I mean, there are some things you don't see, but it's not a lot I haven't seen at this point. And I think it really has prepared me for step in as code enforcement manager for the City of Fairburn. There's a language in code enforcement that you get accustomed to when you're dealing with the residents who are trying to skate around the system and do certain things they're not supposed to do. So that actual experience of hearing things before kind of gives you an insight of how to address certain issues and who to get involved. And yeah, I'm really hoping that'll be a big push for the City of Fairburn. There's a narrative that comes with code enforcement. Everyone has to be involved because of the quality of life that's required in any particular city that comes along with the fire department as well as police. Code enforcement should be within that same conversation. And it doesn't work without the citizens. We can be reactive, but we can be proactive as well. But at the same time, it's the language of this is for all of us, right? It has to be from the top down. And I've learned that early on. I've had some good managers and directors that kind of took me up under their wing. And so it's worked out.
Thank you for that. And if I may add one more thing, I know that the code enforcement officers will not see and catch everything. So within your social media, just encouraging our citizens, if you see it, report it. And that goes a long way.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I had a couple of comments. I just want to say, first of all, the members of council, the city staff actually aware, was it 2 Fridays ago? I believe I actually did a ride around with code enforcement for, it actually turned out to be an hour and a half early in the morning. We rode 2/3 of the city. And literally, and my objective was, number one, what I perceived as what a code enforcement issue, does that actually equate to a code enforcement issue? And that's where both Ms. Brooker and the manager, as well as the city administrator later, actually helped me to bring into focus. One of the things, some of the areas that we did look at, from up and down Rivertown Road over Plantation Road, we went a lot of places. And so one of the things that I did come away with was that, and I think members of council, you might have actually heard me mention this during the retreat, clearly with the volume, the size of our city and the explosion of growth that's happening, this is one department that will actually have to be increased. Staffing right now for the job that they're trying to do for the size of the city is almost impossible for them to do it to the degree and the level of excellence that I even expect. And so that's why I did the ride around for a whole hour and a half. Again, outside of the staffing issue, we talked about the training. We had a lot of conversation. Ms. Brookins was rode with us as well. I wanted to understand the language as it relates to code enforcement language. You guys have heard me mention before that in my first term, one of the things that a former mayor actually mentioned to me was, if you really want your city to come up in quality of life, everybody talks about fire and police, which is important, but in this case, code enforcement, that's going to be the make or break. And so that's, again, why we've actually, in this case, stuck a lot of money into this department, because it's going to make a difference to make and break. One of the things that I want to mention, here's just a clarification. I don't know if Mr. Whitmore to mention or someone, or Ms. Davis. The Meadow Glen area that we talked about, where the warehouses are cutting through Meadow Glen. And I'm asking for clarification just so I would understand it. I don't remember if I saw the sign, if I'm coming off 74, passing the new store. I thought I saw a sign that said 3-axle vehicles not permitted. And my question would be, as it relates to that, technically, if the 3-axle vehicle is coming to deliver, for all intents and purposes, he or she is not in violation unless they're literally sitting there parked for X number of hours. Is that not accurate?
Yes, sir. A delivery is usually exempt from the ordinance. You'll see moving trucks that are full-size 52-foot trailers. Those are allowed to come in and deliver. If they are using Meadow Glen Parkway as a cut-through from 74 to Bohannon or vice versa, that is illegal. You cannot use it as a cut-through street. And again, it's actually a little surprising to think anybody with a 52-foot trailer would try to go down Meadow Glen Way or Meadow Glen Parkway. The road's certainly not big enough for it. And again, one of the other things that I forgot to mention a few minutes ago is that we can reach out as well to the Department of Public Safety, and they do a lot of commercial vehicle enforcement, like through the Motor Carrier Compliance Division. And again, that's another resource we have available that we can make that connection.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Those are go ahead, sir, you want to?
Mr. Mayor, I would just iterate something Ms. Brookins referenced earlier, which is we are taking a look at our ordinance as it relates to commercial vehicles and several other things. I think there are some adjustments we need to make to our ordinance to make it more impactful. And so that process is ongoing. I just wanted to mention that because there's some parts of our ordinance that are either outdated or not in line with current best practice.
And I also want to mention to members of council, we talked about it briefly. I don't want to actually let the cat out of the bag before the ordinance gets brought before council. But I just want to say publicly, a lot of the code enforcement policy upgrading that's long overdue is not just for the residential property. It's actually, in this case, substantially in the commercial district. And I won't go any further than.
One last thing I wanted to mention, and I don't know if they had a chance to cover this in the presentation, because of all the really good questions that you're asking. The enforcement timeline for code enforcement violations is typically, I'm gonna stop right there. Mr. Fleming, tell him how long it takes from the time you first get a complaint to a notice being issued to if they end up having to go to court.
Right. So the objective is for all violations to have a final resolution to it in less than 30 days. Some of those would take 5 to 10 days and we're done. But not all situations are created equally. So we understand that some folks need a little more time to come into compliance. Voluntary compliance is what we want. However, if voluntary compliance is not what the individual like to adhere to, then we can move into forced citation. So what you see before you here is initially what we would do is typically give a door hanger. That door hanger gives you 5 business days to comply with whatever the violation may be, okay? If for whatever reason you are not complied within that 5 business days with the courtesy door hanger, then we move with what we have an official notice of violation. An official notice of violation gives you an additional 5 business days to comply. Once we return at the end of that period, if the resident is not in compliance or the business owner is not in compliance, then we move the right citations, okay? Now, they have the option of asking us for an extension. The officer in the field, based upon his understanding of the case and working with the business owner and homeowner, can extend that extension to him or her if they ask for it before the citation is written. Once the citation has been written, there's no additional time that can be given to come into compliance other than now you have to report to court in order to remedy that issue. So you have 5 business days, another 5 business days, then you have the citation, all right? That citation is typically written at about 14 to 21 days is when the citation is written for those that are not in compliance or have not asked for an extension. So ideally, once that citation has been written, again, now there's a court appearance that's required, but the objective is to have the actual violation resolved 30 days or less, especially dealing with those that are not in the area, rather it's 10 or 15 miles away, across state or across country. That gives us the flexibility to also send out letters to those who may be out of reach for them to understand that your property is now is out of compliance and we're asking for compliance immediately.
And the reason I wanted Mr. Fleming to cover that is from the start of the complaint all the way until it gets to a court hearing, if the person is not voluntarily compliant, it can be several weeks before that case is finally resolved. If I'm a homeowner and I call that complaint in 2 weeks ago and it's still there, sometimes I may think that nothing is happening. And so we wanted to kind of share what that timeline looks like, so that residents would maybe have a better understanding that it can take several weeks before, if there's not voluntary compliance. Like Mr. Fleming said, the goal is voluntary compliance. And most of our residents, when they get a notice, they comply. But there are those for whom that is not the case, and in that instance, the enforcement timeline gets longer. And so it takes a little longer. Our goal is 30 days, but if someone's out of state or if we end up in court, and there are times when a case goes to court and the court may give an extension.
Right.
And so you could end up in a situation where you have several weeks and I'm coming home from work every day and going to work every morning and I'm still seeing this violation and going, hey, is anybody paying attention? And so we wanted to at least share what that timeline looks like typically.
And before we go any further, one thing I want to also mention too, you heard the director talked about the code enforcement entire department with the training. I think they came to council and talked about that. The reason I bring that up because I wanted to make sure it's real clear. Mr. City Attorney, actually because you worked in our city courts for a while as public defender in this case, actually dealing with me, and you talked about that actually before I hired you. Did you have anything you want to add to this conversation as it relates to code enforcement, because you actually on the other side of the equation in the city of Fairmont Court? So.
Yes, certainly. Well, I was actually in the capacity as a solicitor, but I won't hold that against you.
Okay. Did I, what I say? I said public defender. Oh.
And I
Sorry.
think we worked this out, I had some conversation with Denise about it, making certain that the citation is accurate, making certain that we have the location of the citation on the citation, making certain it's the right citation, because the solicitor is going to have to defend whatever is in that notice, and we got this thing called due process, and if I'm accused of something, I should have very specific notice. I should have the location address, I should know exactly what I did, and I should have the right ordinance. And it seems like we got a team that we've put together, and that's gonna happen. And so long as we have very details and we got the right ordinance and we know what location we're talking about, then we're good. And that's often the case where you have, business owners that live out of town, they'll get that confused. But the location of the offense has to be cited on the location, on the citation.
That's why one of the first initiative was to really kind of look at all of our ordinances and start conversations early with the solicitor and the city attorney, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And I will say this, a successful code enforcement division isn't just about planning and zoning, isn't just about giving people citations, it's about working together. So that, we are communicating with all parties, our streets department, working hand in hand with our police department, so that they can tell us when they have issues that fall more under code enforcement, and we can alert them when we see things happening in the field. But also looking at it from a long-range planning perspective, when we're talking about commercial developments and more vehicles, looking at transportation improvements with Lester and his team in community development and public works. It's all of us working together as a team and looking out for the city and making those investments in every department, so that, when we look back and we see those improvements, it wasn't because code enforcement got this bump up, it's because we all work together.
James, you still?
I would just like to compliment your leadership and the department in establishing some flexibility in it. And it depends, but it's not like it's corporal, and kind of thing like that, because there are situations that occur with our citizens that they may need just a little extra time if they're really serious, and you can make that decision on a case-by-case basis. But I want to compliment you with having flexibility in there. Thank you.
Any other member of council have a comment? Seeing none. Thank you so much. That will conclude our workshop, and at this time, we will start at 7 o'clock on the nose.